All right, then let's get started on recreating this track, Tigerlily and Ableton. You can see here that I have the original project as a reference here in a group. I'm going to be switching to that off camera every now and then, just to double check that I'm recreating everything as faithfully as possible. So everything below that reference is basically going to be the newly recreated track, and we're going to do it step by step so that you can see how it all works. So I'm going to give you a quick play of what we're going to be creating in this video. So that forms the foundation of the groove. It's going to be developed and, obviously expanded on later on in the process by additional drums and melodic elements and effects and things like that. This is the foundation upon which, the magic of this track I feel like is really built. And it's a good starting point, not only because it was the first thing I did originally for this track, but also because this is actually a relatively easy one as far as groove goes. And I think it's always, it's nice to have just a solid, easy groove. It'll bode well for later on in the track when you're doing more complicated musical things. So this kick snare layer here, usually I have a dedicated kick, but for this particular song, I actually sliced up a sample that I found that I really liked into its different elements. So this drum sample here, it's from a sort of electro house kind of pack or something like that on Splice that I found. I always like to sample the real world somewhere in my tracks. And by the real world, I mean elements from, somewhere else in the world by different producers that wasn't made by me. And that helps kind of just like bolster my own track sound in reality. If you're producing in a vacuum where absolutely everything is made by tiny little details by yourself, it can be hard to sort of sound like a track that's supposed to be out there in the real world and to be consumed by real people and to be played on big systems and things. So I did use this drum loop as the foundation for basically like the drum track in this track. And so what I did, because this original drum loop is at 128 BPM and this project is 126, what I did was create a drum rack. The Ableton drum rack is very nice and very easy to use. I dragged this sample into it. Now what I have here is the entire, however many bars this is. It's a lot. It's a long time playing in this one sampler pad. So what I'm doing is I'm setting the endpoint of this sample so that I'm really just highlighting just that first kick, because that's what I want. So from there, and I'm going to just remove these quickly to avoid confusion here. What I'm doing is I'm recreating this sound at 126 BPM. And the reason that I'm slicing it up with the drum rack is so that I don't have to pitch stretch it in any way. These sounds do have, all these different options of how you can mangle them and manipulate them in Ableton, obviously. But if I warp things and I change the BPM of them, especially with drum sounds, it can really make them sound less authentic. It can mess with their impact, with their transience. I do like the way these drums hit and the pitch that they're currently at. So I don't really want to change the pitch or the tempo. So what I did instead, I created this one pad that has just that first kick. Oops, there we go. What I'm going to do now is hold down the Option key, or its Control on Windows, and drag it over to the pad next to it. This will duplicate the sound. So now I have a duplicate pad. And this time I'm going to move those start and finish markers to just catch that little hi-hat there. What I might also do at this point is just bump that up in volume just a little bit. So this little hi-hat sound is a little bit louder, just because, that's for personal taste. I'm going to hold down that Option key or Control on Windows again. And this time I'm catching this second kick that also has some clap and snare information in it. I just really like the way that hits, and I'm not sure if there's an official name for this kind of sound, but I call this a split clap, which is basically sort of where you've got a clap and a snare, and they all just hit a little bit differently. They all hit at slightly different times. They're not all, their transients aren't completely lined up, and that's just for stylistic effect. So you can see here in this waveform information, the clap and the snare are actually hitting just ahead of the kick, which is, I think it's much more impactful than if it was all of these sounds just hitting right on that point there. So the next thing I'm going to do is highlight this 4-beat or 1-bar section of time here. You can right click and you can go insert MIDI clip, or you can do Shift Command M as you see here. Now if I double click on this, I have the 3 different sounds that I just isolated, ready to sort of paint onto the canvas, so to speak. So it's a way to give myself a little bit more control over the whole thing, and also to trigger off these sounds at 126 BPM without damaging the actual audio content itself. Now, because this sound here, the split clap, it begins just ahead of the beat. So, and I dare say with this hi-hat too, I'm probably gonna have to just move things around a little bit, in order to sync them up. And you can turn the grid off by right-clicking and just going off, or I just press Command 4, which I believe it's Control 4 in Windows. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to hopefully rather faithfully recreate this drum loop sound in the drum rack. Now, something that I do all the time and that I've just done here, and that I'm actually kind of glad that happened because I can show you, is it's very easy to accidentally mistake which zoom, or how zoomed in or out on a section of time you are. So what I've actually done here is I've drawn these notes in half as fast as they should be. If this ever happens to you, and it totally will, you can really easily fix this by just selecting the notes, and there's this little gray marker here. It's the stretch notes marker, and what you can do is actually, you can change the scale of things. So what I just did then was doubled the speed of this pattern basically just by dragging that little marker. So like I said, this is going to need a bit of dragging. And that's once again just because that sound, that's where the beat is, and then it starts a bit earlier, so that's why it had to come forward. So I can thank that sample for its service, for its hard work. Thank you very much. And now we can move on to the bass line. So a rolling bass line basically is all about the pattern that you use and the timing. And in the case of this particular song, the quantization. So I'm starting with ANA2 or ANA2, which, as I've mentioned in the previous video, I use quite heavily in this track and in a lot of my tracks because it's so versatile. There's lots of fun knobs to tweak and play around with, and the built-in effects are really cool too. So this is just a basic bass preset, which I think that's the name of it. Yep. And what I might actually do sometimes, before even selecting the preset, is actually just using the init patch, which is, the instrument in its most default state, to draw in the notes. That can sometimes help you just put the pattern together before you start figuring out what instrument is going to be playing that pattern. The song is in G sharp. If I solo this out, I'll be able to hear it now. And so that is the, that sort of, you're hearing that the metronome is hitting in that space between the that 1/16th note where the bass is not hitting, and that's where the kick would be, obviously. Now, this song is also quantized. The rhythm of this entire track is quantized, which means it's a dotted rhythm. It means rather than running along as if the rhythm were jogging left foot, right foot, one step at a time in complete uniform rhythm. It's a dotted rhythm, it's a swung or a shuffled rhythm, so it's more like skipping along. That's the difference. To do that, I'm quantizing using these quantize settings. You can basically, in your MIDI clip, you can right click, and all your quantizing is just a right click away, or you can Command Shift U. Once again, I think it's Control Shift U on Windows. And I think moving forward, just assume that Command sign is usually a Control key press on Windows. So this sound is currently 100% quantized. This MIDI pattern rather is 100% quantized to 116. And so what that means is that, if I move these around slightly, and say if I had played these in with the MIDI keyboard, I could quantize these completely to 116, both start and end of the note, and it'll snap those back into place. So that's what quantizing is. It's snapping things to whatever rhythmic parameters you choose. Taking this 116 sound and making it 116T makes it a swung or dotted rhythm. I'm just moving it up an octave so you can hear it a bit better for now. 116T quantized at 100% is an awful lot. It really does. I don't think I've ever quantized something 100% to 116T because it sounds too swung. And the groove almost trips over itself a little bit. So I'm usually somewhere in like the 33 to 40% range. That way the effect is subtle, but it's noticeable enough to really have an impact on the song. Now this is going to become more apparent once we actually select a sound for this. My main bass in this track was just a simple bass patch, basic bass. That sounds like an octave too low. Really easy way to switch octaves in Ableton is just to select all the notes and shift up or down. Now I want you to hear the 116 versus 116T. This main bass sound has some nice sub information in it. Just looking at the waveform, I'm happy to use the sub information that is in this bass sound without doing a dedicated sub bass sound because it's a nice sub bass in this sound. It's such an easy, straightforward bass sound. Other tracks I might have a dedicated sub bass. It just depends. So now I'm going to double this main bass up and make a support bass. So a support bass layer is basically just an additional layer to the main bass pattern that's already there that carries the groove more from a place of mid-range rather than bass. And so this is another Anna preset, which I really enjoy using for this kind of thing. And usually for every track, I'll pick a preset and then I'll play around with the parameters a little bit and change it into something else. And this has an arpeggiator on it, which I'm not using, a pattern, because I've keyed in the notes myself. One of the things I love about Ableton, like now that I've just already tapped that, I've clicked it, it's already available here in the automation. So yeah, whenever you're in the synth and you want to automate any of these parameters, in your automation lanes, just tweak it, and then there it is, and it'll just automatically change. To help create a bit of development with this sound, because this is a sound that is just playing and playing and playing and playing and playing. What you want is a feeling like it's going somewhere, because that keeps the listener interested. I think people's ears don't like hearing the exact same thing on a total static loop. So for this particular track, I'm just moving that around a little bit so that knob is moving slowly. So this sound is constantly on the way to somewhere, even though it's going back and forth the whole time with that one sound. And even just having a subtle difference in how much that knob gets turned up between those two sections, it just creates for an organic and alive feeling track. So this is now the kick loop, and we'll hear it all together. I'm going to just call that rolling bass for now. And that pretty much sums it up for creating our groove. In the next video, I'm going to show you how to create a question and answer riff that goes alongside this groove, so stay tuned.
Thanks everybody for watching, commenting, and indeed liking. We really do appreciate all the support we get here on our Sonic Academy YouTube channel. So if you found this video super useful, please, we'd love you to hit the subscribe button. We update the YouTube channel every week with new content. And if you want to watch some more relevant content, just click on the videos beside me.